Great. Okay, I'm going to do a share screen. So hopefully there we are. You should be popped up to our introductory slide. Hello, everybody, all you early birds who are here in the morning to visit with me. I'm just delighted to be here from Southern Ontario in Canada, where it is raining and just above freezing. And so for us, it's 3 degrees, which is Celsius. So I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit, but you know, up in the upper 30s. So anyways, hi, everybody. And I am just thrilled to be here. So I was invited to talk to you today a little bit about my journey in art. And that's kind of a fun topic. It's not something I have the opportunity to talk about very often. So I really enjoyed having the chance to put some slides together for you today to show you the type of thing that I've been up to and how I got from time past to now in my travels and my art career and life. So this is a little painting that I thought I would introduce my talk with, because this is a happy little bird, and this is basically the way I feel in this wonderful joy at being able to make a living and survive as an artist all of my life. I have been teaching and painting my entire life, or pretty close to it anyways. In fact, this year I will have been teaching for 50 years, which just blows me away, but I'm just thrilled to have the chance to share my great love of painting and art. And I hope that you find some pleasure from it as I do. And so here's a little piece just to get us started. So, and I will just let you know that at the beginning of February, I'm teaching a workshop for you, and it's an online event, and it is an acrylic landscape class. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, I just wanted to make sure that you knew that this is just an introduction to what I'm going to be doing in not even a month away, not too far away. So that's an acrylic class, and it's a landscape class. Now, if you have questions, you are most welcome to put them into the chat box. I'm going to pull that chat box up so that I can see them. And if you have a question, put it in. I'll try and keep an eye on it. That would be really helpful, rather than unmuting yourself, and I will try to get to it. And I stop from time to time and see if there are any questions as well. If you don't know how to use the chat box, probably at the very bottom of your screen somewhere, if you move your mouse or touch the screen of your computer, you'll see a little strip along the bottom, and there's something that looks like a speech bubble. And if you press on that speech bubble, a little chat box will pop up on the right-hand side, and that's where you can send me a message. So that's kind of helpful. So, okay, here's a look. I think about that Dorothy, and when she's in Oz and there's the man behind the curtain, and he says, you know, and that's of course the Wizard of Oz, and he says, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Well, here we're going behind the curtain, and I am going to show you a little bit about my fascination with seeing in a different way and thinking in a different way. And here I am at Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum, and I came across this picture, and it shows, of course, the two faces and the vase, and that really captures the way that I like to look at the world around me. How do I see it? How do I interpret it? And that really helps me to decide how I'm going to paint. So rather than simply looking at something straight on, and I like to kind of play that visual game and shift things around from the positive and negative, which is really what's happening here, and start to work up from there. I started with, I've always painted, and I also have done a lot of printmaking. And much of what I do with my painting is based on printmaking concepts, that be silk screening, as well as something called colograph. And that's layering as you put through the press to get 3-dimension and cut out and raise things, embossing the surface. So those are the things that started me thinking in a different way. And that's where it all began. So I thought that was kind of a fun picture to let you know. So when I was 17 years old, my sister and I decided that we would apply for a government grant to offer some programs, art programs, and that was the beginning of my teaching career. So here I am at 17 or 18 years old, real short hair, with my hands in a bucket of glazing product for pottery. Now, of course, now we would wear long sleeves and rubber gloves and a face mask and all the rest. But back then, oh yeah, just put your hands in and stir the stuff around. So it makes me shudder every time I see this. But you can see how much happiness I have in sharing ideas. And this little boy, and he was, we were talking about doing some pottery together. So I'm glad I have this picture. So as I say, that's about 50 years ago. I can't believe it. Oh my gosh. So I've done as I say, I've done an awful lot of teaching all along, but my ideas and thinking about how I approach things in a different way led me to work through these ideas. And people would ask me to show, how do you do this? Can you teach me how to paint this? And I started thinking about how I could express that, how I could show in a simple way the manner in which I build up my paintings, my designs, and my ideas. And those of you who have done silk screening or printmaking, this makes perfect sense to you. And that is that you block out the areas around what your subject is, and then you layer back. So I developed this little exercise, and it's just the step-by-step of doing the layers. And of course, with watercolor, we build from light to dark, so it works very well that way. And this, I'm sorry, is there a question? Oh, okay. And then this little concept became the basis of the teachings that I have done throughout the years, and was the starting point for my first book. And here's a little painting that I showed, just doing the same steps, but instead of just being circles, it's done with little berries. And so my printmaking background and my work with collagraph, that's the layering of shapes and putting it through a press. The very first one that I did, the very first collagraph I did, was just a bunch of circles. And I had a mat board. And of course, it was probably an 8-ply mat board, so there were a lot of layers in it. And I cut them away and dug out these circles, and then I stacked stuff on top, more circles on top, and I really didn't know how it was going to work. Glued it all together and put it through the press with some damp paper on it. And when the resulting print came out, I had this 3-dimensional paper sculpture, basically, and with all these circles and layers, and it was a real moment of realization of how I could use this idea and layer things and build things, and the idea of everything being backwards. So the things with the cutting into a board, anything that I cut out was actually raised, anything that I glued on top in the paper actually was depressed, was concave. So that was really a good project for me, and it led to so many things in my life. And this is really what started it all off. So that concept of simple bubbles or simple circle shapes and then little berries, I just started to evolve the shapes. And instead of just making something really simple, I cut a notch into it. At first, these kind of look like little Pac-Mans going across the paper. But anyways, I started to change them into lily pads and making little flowers and going from there and building up. And as I mentioned with watercolors, it's easiest to build them from light to dark, leaving the white of the paper and then going darker. And so you can see that this little exercise, this is from a class teaching a project, how that really works well to go from light to dark and building the imagery from the closest to the furthest away. And that is how I build pretty much everything that I do. And you can see I've counted out the layers so that you can see how that builds. So with this being a watercolor, you can see all the hard edges. It tells you I dry between the layers. This is basic stuff, and build it up one value step at a time. So with watercolors going from light to dark, if you work with acrylic, you can start anywhere on the value scale and go in any direction, either direction, up or down the scale. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So here's a little painting that shows you the concept. This is an early piece that I did that really focused on that layering from near to far and from light to dark. All those hard edges show you I dried between the layers. And this is when I'm teaching people who are just starting out with negative painting. This is what I show them. We do this kind of thing. Before too long, I realized that this approach to painting and simplifying things down could be used for absolutely any subject. So, and I'm going to show you some of that today as we go along. And you can see here, I've just done the basic shapes. So nice, just geometrical shapes, and then working into a landscape. And now the stuff that I'm having so much fun with are little birds and animals, but I'm still thinking the same way, building them up by layers and counting back the layers from the front to the back. So here is a much more recent piece. And this is a kind of a fun dragon. I love doing dragons because you can paint them any color you want, and that's great. You can give them ears or no ears. You can give them wings or whatever, and nobody gets to say, oh, they're not really looking like that. Whereas if if you paint a horse and you paint the ears too big, then that's a problem. Or if you put an extra leg onto something, then that's sure to upset people. But with a dragon, it could have 7 legs and that would be just fine. Or no legs. So here's a little dragon, and again, working through the layers, you can see I've counted them back so you can see how I built this up by value. But this is an acrylic piece. So with an acrylic, I like to start with mid-value or bright, and then go darker, darker, darkest, and then bring it back to the light. So you can see that's what I've done in the layering here as it goes back darker to the darkest, and then I've brought back the light. In about layer 7 and 8 are the lightest layers. Okay, let's see. So if you were here visiting me in Southern Ontario, first of all, you'd be probably quite wet coming in from the rain. But I'd like to take you into my home and studio and just show you around so that you have an idea of how I like to live and how my art is such an important focus in my life. This is a picture of Gertie, and she discovered this little wonderful ball. You may have read the story about her on Facebook or on my website or on the internet somewhere. And so Gertie has found this ball, and she thinks maybe it's a little bit of heaven that has fallen down, and she's trying to decide how she's going to get it back to her nest because it's too heavy for her to carry, and she's afraid to leave it and go and get some help because she knows that there's a rook hanging around the area and he's sure to take it. So this is Gertie's dilemma as she's got her treasure, and she's thinking about how she's going to keep this piece of glass for herself. I've always been fascinated by curiosities, whether it be natural curiosities or some of the things that you might come across in Ripley's Believe It or Not, or in a museum. And so I like to live my life kind of in a museum or an art gallery. That's the way I think. I'm fascinated by oddities and curiosities. And as I bring this picture up, oh, that's my little dog right there, sneaking around the back. She's great, studio company. So what I wanted to show you on this is something that I've made. And if you are someone who is interested or has all kinds of little collectibles, things in your drawer that are little treasures from your past, or maybe think something you found while you're out for a walk and it just seems kind of precious. I love refinishing furniture, and I have done a lot of collecting over the years to find important pieces. And I love to live with them and use them. And one of the things that I have done is to take advantage of that. As I say, I've refinished a few pieces. And what I like to do on things with drawers like this is I take the top off, or sometimes they already have an open top. I take part of the top off, and then I line the top drawer with velvet and put my treasures into that. So you can see how I display all these things. I don't like dusting, so I put everything that's a precious treasure inside of these display boxes, basically, and I make my furniture into display cases. So you can see the kind of things that I love to collect. Each piece in here has a little story, something that I found or something that was given to me. And every little thing has a story behind it. That's a little hummingbird's nest right up there that I found. And actually, that's kind of neat. I'll just enlarge this piece just a bit. Yeah, I hope I can do that. Let me just see if I can get him to be bigger. Oops, sorry. This little circle right here, that's called a carpet ball. And that's something that I found. Those of you who haven't seen that before, you might like to look it up. It's a carpet ball. It's from Victorian times, and it's made out of porcelain, and it's hand painted. And I found it out in the garden. I thought it was a piece of bone until I cleaned it up, and it was such a mystery to see this, find this spectacular little porcelain ball in the garden. And it made me think about, well, who lost this marble? Who lost their marbles? Who lost this marble and left it in the garden? Who was playing with it? And what was the story? How long has it been here? And actually, that little marble was the reason that I painted Gertie and her marble, because I kind of felt like that in finding this piece. So anyway, it's just something fun that you might like to think about how you might display some things. If you've got an old chest of drawers, maybe you could take the top off of it and put a piece of glass on. This is my backyard looking out from the studio on a lovely misty day. I am fortunate to live at the very edge of a 6,000 acre conservation area, and I see fox and deer and a number of different critters out the back when I go for my walks and out the studio when I'm painting. So here you are in my studio, and I paint at night as well as I paint too many hours a day. But and this is Sparrow, my studio pal. And she likes to be between me and everything that I'm doing. So you can imagine standing and painting and having her underneath you while you're trying to paint up here. But I just think that's pretty lucky. Here's an interior shot of my studio space. And I do keep it this tidy. I like to be clean and neat and organized. And that really helps me to be productive, rather than trying to find things. I know where they are, and I clean up at the end of every day. So there's Sparrow sitting on a little perch here on her chair. I've written down here the name of the lights that I have, because people often want to know. You can see their panels, and it looks like those kind of panels that you have in a drop ceiling, but this is not a drop ceiling, and these are flush mount or pretty close. They're probably 3/4 of an inch down from the ceiling itself. It's made by Trends LED lights, and I got them at Lowe's, and they are color adjustable, temperature adjustable. So for studio painters, these are really fantastic. You can have them installed. You adjust the temperature, whether you want it warm or cool, or whether you want daylight or whether you want it a little bit different. And so I have those in my studio. You can also see how I like to these were from IKEA, and they're just little picture rails that I put up, and any paintings that need to be looked at again, thought about, I just stack them up there. Here I've got some framed pieces just because I needed to put some pieces up. And I look at the pieces, I have things ready, and I revisit them as time goes by. I've been doing a lot of video work lately, so I've got my overhead lights ready, and that's where I paint and do my filming. I also have a workroom. Let me just pop back. So that's this around the corner in this space is a very large workspace. That's where I cut my mats. I have a copy stand for my photography. And this is my storage room, which is, I think, an artist like envy this space that I've got. And I'll take you in there in a second. I have my own kitchen in the studio. I spoil myself. So that's my kitchen where I do all my cleanup, and I can look out and see the studio. Here's my storage room. So I can put in large paintings as well as art supplies and frames that are ready to be used, though I'm not doing much framing these days. Mostly they just go on the acrylic panels. And then I lay them on top of these risers and tack them down, glue them down. Here are the type of little picture rails that I put things on. So I do a lot of shopping at someplace like IKEA for the studio to get things that work really well, and then I improvise and make them work for me. Storage is important for artists. We've always got a lot more stuff than we can display or frame or send out at a time. So I have a couple of things that I use all the time. This is a magazine rack that I got from a store that was closing out. I like to treasure hunt, and my idea of finding a treasure is to come up with some kind of a rack I can use in the studio. And so these are all pieces that need to be worked on and or painted over, say goodbye to them, whatever. And then I have these wonderful flat files that weigh way too much. When I move, I'm not taking them with me. But then the other thing that I have, I went to a local office place, and they had these this box, and it's probably about what would we say, almost 4 foot tall, 3.5 to 4 foot tall. There it is right there. And it's got all these slots in it. It's actually for sorting paper. So each one of those would hold an 8.5 by 11 sheet. So these are all panels that I have painted, and they're ready to go. They're cataloged, they're numbered. These are actually sorted by kind of animal and the size of the panel. And then I can just stack them in there. You could also have one of those to just put your wet paintings in and leave them in. And that works really well. Again, I like to be organized. Here's my office, which is where I am today working, and it's right at the front door, so that I like to keep the business end of it, the office end of it is separate from the studio. So here's some things that I like to remind myself of, and I keep these, and if you want to take a screenshot of that, go ahead. I don't know whether any of it will be helpful to you or not, but here are the things that I have used as my guiding advice, things that I remind myself, and that is I like to think big and always strive for the next level. So if you are currently doing your artwork and you're showing your paintings at the local community show and you're doing pretty good, push yourself to go to the next level. So not just working at the local area, think about doing something for your district or something for your state. And if you're doing state shows, then start thinking about doing national shows. And if you're doing national shows, push yourself to do international shows, because that is, it's surprising. I found that entering my work in a international show was no more work than it was to enter a piece in a local show. And so I really have pushed myself to think big and go to the next level. I always like to know how things work. It's got me into a lot of trouble in my lifetime, starting out with when I took my sister's camera apart when I was about 8 years old. But I always like to know how things come apart, how they fit together, how mechanisms work, and I can't keep my fingers or a screwdriver out of things, hopefully not the electrical plugs, but I think I learned that as well. But that is something that's really helped me, and that's how I approach all of my paintings. I look at something, I think about how can I paint this? How will this work? I had some marvelous advice when I was younger. Jack Reed, who some of you would have his books, he wrote a number of books. He was such a dear man. And he said to me, if you want to write a book, write a book. Now, I know that sounds kind of strange, but what he meant is get at it. Don't just talk about doing something, do it and get it down on paper before you present it. Don't go to the publisher. We were talking about publishing. Don't go to the publisher and say, I have an idea for a book. He said, do the book, take it to them, present it and say, here's what I want to do. And that really helped me an awful lot. And Maxine Masterfield, who also some of you may know, those are names to look up if you don't know them. Maxine said to me one time, if you want to go international, write a book. And that she was right on with that. Nowadays, things are different because the book market is not as big as it was when I was doing my writing, because now we've got the internet and people are doing things on Instagram and Facebook, and they're doing video work and YouTube shows. So it's not so much about buy an art book. I'm sure most of you have a library full of those art books, and you know that they're just not being produced in the same way. So, you know, I do appreciate the advice that I got and how that helped me. So then the next little comment would be, if you want to earn a living with your art, you need to do something more than just create fantastic paintings. Teaching has been such an important part of my career, and it is what has helped me to get my paintings out to the world. So being a teacher of art will help me. First of all, I learn a lot from my students, but it also helps me to promote my paintings, and it helps me to make sales of my paintings. And that is a really important thing to do. So if you are struggling to make a living from your art, consider what else you can do. It might be teaching, or it might be something else, to make something bigger out of it and think of it as an art business. So when I'm doing my paintings, I judge whether they're a success or not by whether I have learned something. Sometimes it's don't do that again, but as long as I've learned a lesson from it, got something that I can take to the next painting, I consider it a success. It doesn't mean that I won't paint over it and redo it or something else, but I don't get frustrated with my pieces. I just say, what have I learned? Okay, time to move on to something else. So there's a couple of other little notes down there. I won't read through everything, but I will just mention the bottom one, and that is to simplify everything. So often we get things so complicated, and I really try with my artwork to keep it simple, as well as my business practice and life approach to life. So here's me a long time ago. I'm going to guess maybe 30 years ago. Yeah, that'd be about right. And painting in my studio. And you can see here's a really large painting in behind me. That's a watercolor. And it's about the size of a double bed quilt. And that was the largest piece I ever did. That's just a wee section of it. But that's me in my studio. I think one of my children took that picture. I have two children. My daughter is a university professor in British Columbia, and she is the academic dean of a design college, and my son is an inventor. So they have all enjoyed an idea of painting and art. That's what they grew up with. And the idea of living in a museum kind of appealed to them too. Here's some of the things that I have done, my 2 books, as well as my second book was translated into Mandarin. That's pretty cool. I love the cover that they put on it. I thought that was pretty neat. And then these are the videos that I have put out as well. Those were all through Northlight Books, which of course is no more. And so now it's Artist Network carries the stuff. So here's my very first book, Watercolor Painting Outside the Lines. And it was the first and actually the only book that's out there about negative painting. And I've just been so honored by how well it has been received and the kind response. It has gone truly around the world and has been bought and sold and traded many times. So I appreciate what this little book did for me, It was 5 years in production. I devoted my every day and night to working on it. And when it came out, I was glad that it was finished. I'll say that's a lot of work. Anyways, so here's a picture of the way that I was working when I wrote that first book. So this is a watercolor. All of the paintings in that first book were watercolor. And drying between the layers with the hard edges. And that is the level that I was thinking at when I was making this book. And when I finished the book, as soon as it went out, as soon as the manuscript, everything was gone, I started to think about, well, these concepts that I have developed, can they be used for mediums other than watercolor? And I approached Doug Hopper, who is the president of Holbein, and Holbein's been very kind and supportive of my work for forever. And I said to him, I was thinking about doing something different, and maybe I should try oils or acrylic. What did he think I should do? And he said he thought I should try working with acrylics, and he sent me a box of acrylic paints. And then that turned around everything, and where watercolor is my very first love, acrylics certainly have taken over a strong hold, and I just adore working with them. So here I am in my studio, younger years, on those pose thing for the newspapers, where you hold the brushes. Everybody has to have a picture like that. So my second book started working with acrylics, and many of the projects in it are acrylic paintings as well as watercolor, but it was about simplifying design and color. It's not really so much about negative painting. I use negative painting in everything that I do. I'm completely obsessed and addicted to it, but this is about simplifying design and color. And that's the little piece that's on the front of it. Oh, here's the book that was translated. That was about the same time as my second book. Well, that was after the second book came out. And that's an acrylic. So I'll just show you quickly a bit of change that started to happen. So you can still see lots of crisp edges here. But in this upper section, there's soft edge layering going on. And where you see soft edges, that was done on damp paper or wet paper. So the work started to change from being all hard edge to coming down into layering without drying in between. And that's what's happening here. All of these layers going back, that's all done in one go, one shot, and the same down here. It's so much fun. It's so exciting. And you can make a terrible mess with it. You can just turn everything into soup, or it comes out and you say, this is fabulous. So once that wet into wet stuff is done and the piece dries, then I've gone back in afterwards and crisped up some of the edges on dry paper. So that is how that was done. Here we are. This is pretty much all soft, wet into wet piece. I'm very fond of this painting. I've kept it for myself. I have it in my home. The only hard edge stuff that you see is right here. I'm not sure now if I were going back, if I would bother to do that. I think I would just be happy with all the dreamy stuff going on. So I'm going to just pause here for a minute to see, does anybody have a question? If you need to unmute yourself, if you're not comfortable putting it into the chat box, now's your chance.
Do you all have any questions?
They're all still here, are they? Okay. So here is a piece. I've done a lot of traveling. I've had so many fantastic adventures. I've been to Alaska 3 times and painted there. I've been to France, England, Holland, a number of places. I think just about every state in the US and every province in Canada, and had the opportunity to paint there. So here I am painting outside. You can see I sit low to the ground on a stool. I put all my art supplies on the ground and a little plastic panel on my lap, and then I paint. And I just adore painting outside. If the weather's decent, I'm not so happy if it's not so great. But anyways, here's the view. Here's what I saw. Here's what I made. Just to give you an idea of what I did. That's me painting it right there. Oops, I just popped that down. Let me just change that back to 100%. There we go. Sorry. Once in a while the computer does its own thing. Okay, so here I am painting out in a place just outside of Lunenburg, Nova Scotia. I believe this was just beyond a place called The Gut. What a cool place for a name. The Gut. And I'm seeing is a question. Do you keep a journal of the lessons you learn from each painting? That's a good question, Lil. No, I don't write down in a book what I've learned. I just take the ideas. So my journaling would be a series of paintings, and I just look at them chronologically to say what I took from one painting to the next painting. Probably keeping an actual journal would have been a great idea. So here I am, and just so you know, I'm actually painting this scene, but you can see I've turned my back to it. Here I am with my lady friends painting, and I have my back to what I am painting. They are looking at it, I'm looking away, because I get too excited with what I'm seeing sometime, and I try to put too much in. This helps me to simplify it. And sometimes that is the same when I'm working with, if I look at a photo, I look at it, I think about it, and then I turn it over. And so while I'm happy painting outside and being outside, very often I turn away from the scene to put the shadow over my paper and my painting, and also so that I'm not trying to capture every cool thing in the scene that I'm looking at. Here I am painting in Alaska up at Mendenhall Glacier, and I've got a few people standing around me watching me paint, and so I had a good time. I painted a couple spots. You can see once I'm on the ground painting, and I'm happy doing that. The exciting thing happened after I finished with this little piece that I'm working on. I got up and marched myself back up the hill, and as I was going up the hill, became aware that there was something beside me over here, and I looked, and here was a bear going down the hill as I was going up the hill. He was not very far from me, and I was looking down at my feet as I'm going up the hill, so I didn't see him coming down, and he just kept going. He really didn't care, which was a good thing. And after he got to the bottom, I took a picture because I really wanted to make sure I got that. And at the top, the ranger came, he said, oh, you can't go down there, there's a bear. I said, yeah, I know, I saw him, I met him on the hill. So, you know, we have exciting things. I was chased by a dog once, but that was scarier. Here I am doing a little demo in front of a group of people. This was in Florida. That's going back a while. So it's really fun. I get to meet all kinds of great people and show them what I do and how I do it. These are all different opportunities where I've been a guest and had the chance to show people and get all mic'd up and cameras, and oh my gosh, it's just too much fun. Now you may recognize one or two of the people in these pictures because I've had such a great time meeting fantastic artists and teachers and princes. That's Prince Charles. And he has one of my paintings in the Royal Collection as well as in his personal collection. And I have had the chance to spend a bit of time with him. So that's pretty nice. And you may know Bob Burridge. We're great pals. And down on the bottom, you might know Jean Pedersen. She's a wonderful teacher and painter and too much fun. And then Dean Mitchell. If you know Dean, his work is spectacular. If you don't know him, please look up these people's work. That's Robert Burridge, Jean Pedersen, and Dean Mitchell. You will love the work that they do. And it's so neat to have the chance to see what other painters are doing. So, and every once in a while you get interviewed by the TV and, you know, so it's been such a cool career. I've had just too much fun with it. So let me just take you on a little bit of a tour of the kind of work that I have done that people don't know about. And so every once in a while, somebody will say to me about negative painting, they say, well, you know, that's interesting, but you can't do portraits like that. And you know, as soon as somebody says to me, you can't do something, then I just say, watch me. And I figure out how to do it. So that's what I was challenged with a long time ago. Somebody said to me, well, you can't do portraits with negative painting. So I sat down. This is a friend of mine. He's a wonderful actor from Broadway and Shakespearean theater. And I painted Sandy, and I painted it in a straightforward kind of way. The type of thing that many of you have been taught to do. And I painted it straightforward because I needed to think about how I could deal with this subject, approaching it with negative painting. And from that point, I started to develop some little pieces. And very, very few people have seen my portrait work, but I thought you might get a kick out of seeing how it has developed and changed. And so you can see here, I'm thinking about one of the things I have learned from working with negative painting is a profile works best. So a straight on portrait is not as easy to do as a portrait work, because when you do negative painting, the shapes and edges tell the story, and it's the silhouette edge that you want to focus on. So then it started to develop into something like this. And this is how I approach my portrait work now. And it's all just straight negative painting. So I put the color down I put the hair down. The color, this black and this red stuff went down first. And then I cut away this edge. So the hairline edge and around the ear, I just lifted that color. And then I put in the color for the face. And then I used an opaque to cut the outside silhouette. So it's 1, 2, 3 layers for this little figure. And this one's called Her Red Coat. My tour guide in France is Isabel, and she's just a fantastic person. And her hair is, or was, this wild. It's now lovely and gray, but it was this wild. And she has very strong features. And she had never liked a painting that anybody had done of her before. She takes a lot of art tour groups around, and she hadn't liked the paintings that they had done before. And then when she saw this, she was so thrilled. She cried, and I was just delighted that she liked how I had portrayed her. So I think this is called the Red Scarf. And this is my tour guide and dear friend, Isabel. Her hair is just crazy. And here's another little piece, a little portrait. And this woman had a wonderful black mink hat on. So I wanted to get that. And I really just was looking at her face and the features and carving them away and doing a little bit of line drawing. So you can see how I like to simplify things down. I'm not interested in shadows and shading and doing all of the things and the inside details. I just like to make the flat shapes, basically. Most of the paintings that people see when they come to my workshops or online are very small because those are really portable. I can put them in my suitcase and take them with me, and they're affordable. And so then people sometimes assume that I don't work large, but this is a very large painting. This is 60 inches by 40 inches, and it was done for a commission piece. And just a big abstract landscape that I did. And that's an acrylic. And here is another, a close-up of another piece. I'm teaching a workshop in the spring for leading edge, and it's going to be on this kind of abstraction and stylizing and embellishing the surface with acrylics. I also do some collage work. And if we talk about people for you to look up, I would highly recommend you look up Jonathan Talbot, T-A-L-B-O-T, Jonathan Talbot. And a lot of you have done collage work before in which you're wet gluing things down. And Jonathan does things a little bit differently in that it's a dry application. You coat the paper or your collage material front and back with gel medium, you let it dry, and then you cut out the pieces, arrange them, and then you use a heat tacking gun to tack everything down. And that really suits me because I like to arrange the shapes before I say, this is how I want it. And so my collaging is something that allows me to do that, but I do the heat gun method or heat iron method. This one is just colored papers put down, and then I've done a little bit of carving out negative shapes. And I was really getting into collage work when COVID hit. And I was so focused on, I was having such a great time with it. And I thought, well, this is something I really want to do. I love doing this stuff. And then COVID came and I had to switch directions. So I'll show you where I had to go after I didn't get enough time with collage. So I would like to do some more. Since I have a fascination with birds and bugs and nature, you'll see that the text that I've included in my pieces does relate to the story that I'm telling. And very often these little circles pop up and they represent the heads of pins that you've seen bugs and butterflies pinned into collector boxes. So that's what these little circles represent on this piece. But negative painting nonetheless. Here's another bug. In this piece, I was thinking about the skeletal structure of a painting. So the design of a painting. So I did a painting that was done in acrylic, and then I layered on top of it with these collage pieces. And this was done with that dry tacking down with the heat tacker. And then so that the design, the structure pieces that you see, all these hard edge bits and the lines, that repeats the design that you see in the painting. I flipped it around a bit, but that's basically what my design is. So it's kind of a mathematical thing that I'm figuring out and thinking about shapes and designs. And here's another one again, thinking about design and the color wheel and just making notations. So when Lil asked about keeping a journal of my lessons, I am journaling all the time in my painting. Sometimes it's about design and about just my thoughts. And that's what I've written down here. This is really about the radius. And that's what this is all counting up and so on, just thinking out those mathematical things. Love painting the landscape. Here's a nice simplified watercolor landscape. I start from the bottom and then build to the top, which is backwards from what way we usually do. Before I talk about the landscapes, are there any questions about the collage work? Let's wait and see if anybody puts it in. I know I'm just
Linda, one of the questions is what kind of paper do you use on your collages?
okay. Oh, thanks. I didn't, that question didn't come through to me. So on the, is that the paper in a collage or in my regular work?
The add-ons.
She's asking about the add-ons to your collage. So
Oh, okay. Any kind of paper. So you can take watercolor paper, you could take magazine, you can take newspaper, you can take anything, and you put the gloss medium on either side of it. So you gloss the one side, wait till it dries, turn it over, gloss the other side. I hang it up on like a clothesline with pins. And then when it's all dry, you can cut it or tear it, assemble it dry, and then you just use a heat tacking iron just to tack it down. It's fantastic. If you want to know more about it, investigate Jonathan Talbot. I know there's information online about how he works, and his work is sensational. And it really suited me instead of the wet mucking with a gel and piling stuff up and just waiting for it to happen until it satisfied me. This allows me to arrange things and then say, this is the way I want it, and then fix it down. So I use any kind of paper. Watercolor paper is great, and I just coat it with acrylic. So this would be watercolor paper that I painted red, a watercolor painter that I painted bright yellow, and then I just cut it out.
thank you.
You're welcome. So here are some of my watercolor landscapes.
Oops, I'm sorry. There's another question here in the
Yes.
room. Oh, what is the base paper on your collages?
Oh, a lot of times I take a panel that I used from the past that didn't work out, an acrylic panel, a piece of ampersand clayboard or aquaboard. I can use map board, but then it tends to bow a bit. Anything that didn't work out, I just paint on top of that, and that's it. So clayboard a lot of times.
Okay, we have one more question here.
Yes.
When you have your initial painting, do you put that medium on that before you apply?
So the question is, when you have your initial background painting, do you put medium on it before you apply the pieces?
It helps. It helps.
Okay,
Yeah, so you do the painting, then I put a layer of gel over top of it, just nice thin layer of gel, and then let it dry. And then this little bug, for example, he was probably cut right out of an insect book. Cut him out really carefully. And I had I had gelled the paper front and back, then I cut the bug out and I laid it down, arranged the other pieces, and then I just take the heat gun with a piece of silicone paper between it, and I just tack them down, and it just like fuses. Perfect fusion. Hard edge, if that's what you like.
great, thank you.
It's so much fun. Oh my gosh, it's just such a riot. When I started doing this, I thought, this is it. This is what I want to do forever. I had such a good time with it, and I was piling up bits of paper and all kinds of really neat things. And I love doing it. And then COVID came along and I had to face the reality of making a living again. And so I started doing video work. Here's some more of my watercolor landscapes. You can see I'm not afraid of using dark paint and opaques in my watercolors. Now I'm going to be teaching an acrylic course for you in just a few weeks. And so I'm going to show you 4 of my acrylic paintings that I did, just to give you some ideas of the landscapes that I do using acrylic. Very simplified. And I really focus on dividing the space into a foreground, a middle ground, and background, and then choosing one of those areas to have as where the action is and where my area of interest is going to be, and going from there. So here's another acrylic. I love doing these brushy foregrounds. I'm going to show you how to do that. And that almost paints the whole painting. And then we just carve around it with the layers. So one, that's all the first layer, second layer, third layer, fourth layer. And that they're really simple, quick to do. And I see the landscape in those layers. And it's so cool when students come to me in a workshop and they've got a photo and they say, I see it, it's here, here's the negative space, here are the layers. Yeah, it's always there. It's just a matter of learning how to identify it and how to play the game of building in layers. This is a large one. This one's a 40-inch by 40-inch piece. So after COVID, when COVID hit, and people started saying to me, are you going to teach online? I said, no, I don't want to teach online. I watched a bunch of people doing it and their cameras were all over the place and the sound was bad. And I just thought, no, it made me dizzy to watch them. And I didn't want to do that. And of course, like so many of us, I thought, I hope that COVID wouldn't be that long. And as the dates were disappearing from my calendar and all of my workshops just kind of slid off the calendar and melted away, I realized I needed to do something. And so I decided what I wanted to learn how to do was make video. And so I talked with a friend of mine who teaches filmmaking, and we set up a studio for myself and with the camera equipment and the lights and the microphones and so on. And I started filming, and my very first film was a little clip of my grandson fishing. It was terrible, and I didn't know what I was doing. And then I started really taking it seriously, and now I am doing a lot of filmmaking. And I love it. But this is just to show you the kind of thing. So when you see a movie, this is what it looks like to the producer, to the person, the filmmaker. And so what you're seeing here, this is the little tap right where this line is. That's what you're seeing right there. So that little bit of text shows up here. Here's the picture. Here is the talking line. That's my voice line. And this is the music going in here. And I've learned how to do all of that, plus put in captions. And here's a transition, this little thing that looks like two arrows pointing at each other. That's what makes the one picture fade into another picture. And oh, I've just had so much fun doing this. I love it. It's just the neatest thing ever. And so today, I'd have to count now. Those are all movies that I've made in the last couple of years, 2.5 years. I think I'm over 100 now, but it's really neat. I love doing them. So if anybody's interested in learning how, I'm really happy to share the information that I know. That's all I'll tell you about that. Now, in our just a few more minutes, I'm just going to show you a few of my most recent work that started after a severe illness. And as I was leaving the hospital and sitting and waiting for a car to take me home, there were little sparrows on the ground popping around, and they were so joyful and grabbing food from each other. And I started to look at them and I started to figure out how I would do something like that. And then I realized I needed to take it the same way as I do with everything else that I do, and that is slicing it by layers. So in this case, I'm thinking the stick, a bird, that's the sequence of layers. And that's basically how this would have been done with the layering. So this is the first layer, second layer, third layer, fourth layer going back. But now I start to break up my bird shapes. This is an early one, but I still kind of like it. And I'm doing all kinds of texturing and designing and thinking about repeating my shapes as I go through. This is a tropical dragon. He likes grapefruits. So here is just a few, but you can see how I simplify the shapes down, thinking about the layering. I grew up with horses, so I like to include them in. These animals and birds that I'm doing now bring me so much pleasure and occupy my time. I love working on them. These are small pieces, anywhere from 12 inches by 12 inches down to 6 by 6 inches. This would be 6 by 8. And I do the texturing first. You can always tell the order that I paint them in by what's the thing that's closest to me. So his wing and face were the first layer, second layer, third layer, fourth, and then fifth going back. So darker, darker, lighter, lightest. It's an acrylic and it's on ampersand clay board. I love telling little stories that I go along with them. I think this is something like one moth divided by 2 birds does not a meal make, something like that. This was inspired by a scarf that I saw, a velvet scarf with little flowers on it. And it was pretty. Again, here's a little story. I like to repeat colors and then do the shapes. This is quite a new piece. I think you're the first people to see him, see them. Unlikely friends, but they are. And you did see this little bird at the beginning. You all know the story of Peter Rabbit and his little blue jacket that the farmer got. His name escapes me at the second. You all know who he was. McGregor. Farmer McGregor got his jacket. Well, these are the pants from Peter's suit. That was the little, so this is a relative of Peter Rabbit. I have a good time making my stories up. Again, this is a new piece. This is larger. This is 12 inches by 12 inches on ampersand clay board. I also use pencil with them and like to develop my designs. If you are interested in learning more about negative painting, I have a free handbook that you are most welcome to. Just go to my website, which is lindakemp.com, and just scroll down the page and you will see this book that's available to you. You can help yourself to that. It's a download, so it doesn't come in the mail. You download it and all the instructions are there. There's another free handout, and that is tips for painting red. Aren't these guys crazy? They remind me of those Heckle and Jekyll characters. I have an on-demand course online, and this is, there are 5 handbooks and 26 videos that go with it, as well as some design templates. It's the basics of how to work with negative painting. It's all hard edge stuff, but it will teach you exactly how I deal with painting. This look at one of the inside of one of the handbooks. And I show you how all the steps to go through. There's video for each one of these steps. There's the information about the materials, information about the color concepts, which colors to use, and the idea of how you build up the layers. That's just a quick look at part of one of the books. So the actual course, this little course here, which is on my site, it's 90 Canadian. So that's probably about, I don't know, 75 American, something like that. So if you're interested, you can find that. So there's a question, do I ever paint on canvas? Absolutely. Let me go back. I'll show you something that was on canvas. This is on canvas, stretch canvas. And this is on canvas. You can see the tooth, you can see the weave of the canvas in there a little bit. There's probably some others, but yeah, I like working on canvas too. So here are all different ways that you can find me. I'm on Facebook. If you look up Linda Kemp Artist, you'll find me. And then I have 2 pages or 2 groups for negative painting that you can post your paintings and get some feedback and so on. They're really interesting and very nice groups that people say kind things instead of being nasty on, and I watch it carefully. So I think there's this one I have about 20,000 people on, and this one's a much smaller group, but you are welcome to go and join either of those, as well as visiting me on Facebook. Please come to my studio, or please come to my website, which is lindakemp.com, because you'll find lots of free stuff. So I'm going to stop share and see. You're welcome to turn your cameras on. I love to see all your cute faces. And if you have some questions, I'm most happy to try and answer them for you. It's a very quiet group.
Well, in the room here, nobody seems to have a question at the moment.
Are they still awake?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Good.
Well, Linda, it doesn't look like we have any good questions. It seems like maybe you did such a good job of explaining things that we don't need to, but we really appreciate you spending the time with us today, and
Pleasure.
we look forward to seeing you at the class in 2 weeks.
Yeah, me too. I'm looking forward to it. I've got everything ready for you. And for those of you who are taking the course, I have set up a web page for you. And on that web page, you're going to find a list of all the supplies, as well as the specific supplies for each of the projects that we're going to do. You're going to see each of the projects. You're going to get some handouts. And I post the recordings of the lessons get posted for 6 weeks after the course is finished. So if you miss a day, or if you have to go somewhere for an afternoon, don't stress, because you'll be able to watch it for 6 weeks afterwards to paint along. And that's only for people that are registered for the course, and that's a private page.
And I will be sending that link out in the next day or so to everybody that's registered.
Super, that's great. And then you can get your gear ready and do a little bit. There's a few little previews of videos of some things that you can do to test your paints and so on. So you get all ready to go. It's gonna be fun. I can't wait.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Linda. You can
Thank
go
you.
ahead and get on with your painting for today.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Thank you so much for joining me, everybody, and happy painting.